Hi, my name is Gabrielle, and this is my analysis on influenza season for 2018. This analysis is to determine where to send hospital staff for the 2018 influenza season. We want to know what state, county, and quantity to send help to and when in order to accommodate the expected spike in hospital patients due to influenza. Influenza causes a lot of deaths each year, particularly in high-risk populations. You can see this tree map here shows just the high-risk deaths in the states for just the year of 2017. California, New York, Florida, Texas, these guys have had the worst of it in 2017. Throughout the analysis, when I refer to high risk, I am talking about people under the age of 5 and over the age of 65, because that is what the CDC has determined to be a high-risk age group. So, where are they? You can see here a map of the US. On the left is showing populations from census data. The darker the color, the more people in that state. You can see California, Texas, New York, these guys have the highest population overall. If you look to the right, you can see a bar chart of the total deaths in those same states within the same period of time. So that's 2009 to 2017. If you want to look, you can click on these higher populations, and you can see Texas, California, Illinois, we got New York, Pennsylvania, Ohio, Florida. These guys are the highest. California dwarfing the rest of them overall. You can see it has not only the highest population, but it also has the highest total deaths. So from that, we can determine that states with higher populations will have more influenza deaths overall. So what about age groups? Right here, I have 3 different visualizations. Right here on the right, we have the percentage of high-risk deaths versus the high-risk population. So this does not include anyone outside of those high-risk age groups. You can see a higher high-risk population is correlated with more high-risk deaths. This trend line here shows that the higher the population, the more deaths there will tend to be. You can see that again here on the left. Each of these colors represents a different state, and the bigger the dot, the higher percentage of people in those high-risk age groups compared to the rest of the population. Now you look at California, and it doesn't look like there is a high percentage of people in those high-risk age groups comparatively, but if you look, you'll also see that the total population is higher than these other states. If we click on this here, you can see that the elderly, there are so many more of them, and if you just look at this little box, you can see 84% of the deaths, out of all the deaths, are people within high-risk age groups. The high-risk population itself is only 19%, and that's in California. So let's look at another one, Florida. This one has a higher percentage of high-risk individuals, 25%. The high-risk deaths against the total deaths is 77%. The population, however, overall is a lot lower. You can see that again over here. We'll look at North Carolina. This has 76% of high-risk deaths out of all the deaths, and only 19% of that total population are people in those age groups. Look down here and you can see all of them. The less than 1 and then the 65 and older, those are our high-risk age groups, and you can see the elderly here. Those total deaths are so much higher than any of the others. And again, if you look down at that bar when we look at these here, you can see that is the case in each of these areas. So what about time? Here we have two different line graphs. The one on the right here shows the course of several years, 2009 to what we predict the total deaths to be in 2018. And we're only showing the 5 most affected states here, the ones who have the most influenza deaths. So California is way up here at the top. You saw that on the map over there. They have the highest population and the highest total deaths. You can see that again here on this line graph. And you can see over time, looking at just the years, it tends to remain pretty steady, relatively flat. You know, it goes up and down a little, but not a whole lot. You go over to the left, right here on this one, and it's showing months throughout a span of several years, and it's going up and down and up and down in a pretty steady rhythm. So what can we see in this pattern? Let's look at just 1 year in one state. California, 2010. You can see it does a bit of a swoop. Let's look at a different state, different year, 2013, New York. About the same shape. Okay, one more. How about Pennsylvania, 2016? Again, that same general swoop. So let's go back. You can see this. It goes up and down. So what does this tell us? Well, if we look at the spikes here, you can see this spikes in January. This one, also January. This one, January again. This one, March, and January. January again. So what that tells us is that in multiple different states, over time, for several years, the influenza deaths have been at their peak in January. So when do we actually send the hospital staff? Well, you want them to already be there when the deaths are at their peak. So when do these begin to rise? Go back a little bit. You can see December is kind of in the middle. So go back a little more. Right here where this peak begins to rise is November. So they start going up in November. They get worse throughout the winter months, and then January is when the most deaths tend to occur. So what do we do with this? Throughout this analysis, we can see that populations that have more people and populations that have more people in high-risk age groups tend to have more deaths. You can see that again in this in these box plots down here. Just the records within the data itself shows more deaths for elderly groups up here. You can see that pretty clearly. So people with places with higher populations and places with higher populations, and then November and January is where we're going to be, where and when we're going to be sending these hospital staff. So what do we do next? Well, we need to scroll in a bit. The data itself needs to go we need to go closer and look at counties in addition to just the states, because different hospitals in different places, within the same state, you might have a really dense population versus one where there aren't a whole lot of people. So you want to make sure the staff are in the right place. So look at counties and calculate which ones have the higher populations and which ones have more people in high-risk groups within those populations. And once we run those numbers, we can calculate the number of staff needed for each of those counties in order to maintain that staff-to-patient ratio. Then, once that's all done, in November, December, and January, we make sure that those staff are sent to the right place at the right time. Thank you for coming, and hope you have a great rest of your day.